It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to congratulate the Chamber for inviting the IDB to partner on this event. It's really important what you all are doing here, and I gather there are members and non-members in the audience. So some of you actually, well, I think everybody paid to be here, so I hope we can give you good value for your money for this breakfast this morning. What am I going to talk about? I want to talk about how important partnerships are. And that's what we're doing here this morning. I want to talk about specific challenges that Barbados faces and that you face as business people working in Barbados. And then James is going to what they can offer in Barbados, and Annie in our work. So hopefully not to overlap too much. I'm also conscious that most of us only have attention for about 7 minutes, so especially on a full stomach. So I'm going to try to be very concise. Yesterday, and I want to pick up on something that Misha mentioned earlier in her remarks about the perception of corruption. And by the way, it's not anecdotal, it's actually empirical, that 54% of people in Latin America and the Caribbean think that there is a rise in corruption in the countries in which we all live and work. And that's as high as 60%, for example, in Jamaica. In Bahamas, it's about half of the population. So there are a lot of issues between the private following the news, and I'm sure you have. This week, there's a lot of upheaval in our region, in Bolivia, in Chile, in Ecuador, in Haiti. And these events are not isolated, and they suggest that citizens in our region are paying more attention to governance issues and the whole question of inequality. The bank's purpose in this region started out 50 years ago and 60 years ago in the whole region to address some of these issues. How to reduce income inequality across the region, how to grow the middle class. And for the most part, for the last 50 years, the bank has done that fairly successfully, from all the way in Patagonia, in the most deepest parts of South America, all the way through to the Bahamas. That has been happening. But as we've seen globally, there's a lot of uncertainty with how we as individuals interact with our government, the whole issue of what is truth now, what is the information we're getting. And all of that is affecting how the private sector and governments work and how our citizens respond. If I put in perspective the big picture around the economic environment in the Caribbean, there are many, many issues. Perhaps the most important one for this discussion is the slow economic growth rate of the past few decades in the Caribbean, Barbados being no exception. You know that in Barbados, the growth rate, the highest it's been in the last decade has been about 2%, but it's been wobbling. And of course, everybody's aware of the macroeconomic challenges at the moment and the fact that Barbados is in a program with the IMF. The problems underlying economic growth and the slow rate of economic growth in the Caribbean is rooted in our minds, with all the data we have, around productivity growth. And what do we mean by that? Well, I think it's a phrase that gets bandied about. So-and-so is unproductive. They spend 2 hours coming to work in the morning, they have breakfast, they start working maybe for 1 hour, they start to prepare for lunch, they go to pick up the kids at 3 o'clock, they come back, it's time to go home. What have I done all day? So that's a good case of maybe the productivity of that individual is much less than somebody who's producing something, and at the end of the day, you can actually measure what's been produced. But productivity for an economy as a whole includes the returns on labor, the returns on capital mostly. So investment in the Caribbean and in this region, and in Barbados, where we have data today, has been investment on the part of the government as well as the private sector has not really been as high as 20% for a long time. So that means that most of what is contributing to GDP has to do with government spending or consumer spending, and not really returns on investment. If you think about what is what makes up GDP growth, it's consumption of individuals, it's investment by the private and the government sector, and it's government spending, and it's exports minus imports. So it's a big issue, and we need to figure out how to address that. Now, how do we think about improving productivity in an economy? So if you concentrate on labor, labor can be improved by higher skills, more use of technology. Government's efficiency can be improved by delivering services to the private sector and to individuals who use government services in a more efficient way. One of the big programs we're trying to champion in the Caribbean is to move to a digital transformation framework for government. Having services delivered electronically in every sense. We know that in this region and in Latin America, not just in the Caribbean, that still over 90% of all government services involve an individual having to go into a government office to get that service. And in some cases, on average, it takes about 4 hours. In some countries, it takes up to 6 hours. In Guyana, 6 hours. In the Bahamas, almost 3 hours. In Jamaica, not just one visit, but you may have to go twice to get the same service done. That's a lot of inefficiency in government services. So imagine if what you need to do with the government can be done electronically, in a mobile app, or from your laptop, or from your bed, right? There's no need for you to drive to the revenue office to pay taxes, or to go to a passport office to deliver 50 documents, and maybe they say you need another document, you go and bring it back. That's what we're focusing on. How to improve the delivery of government services to make the burden on the private citizen and the burden on the private sector to be lighter and less expensive and much more cost effective. We know that by delivering services electronically, we can speed up the delivery of that service by 74%. We know that it costs about 2% of what it costs if you do that service face-to-face. So that's a big effort of what we're trying to do. This region is, and we had a big discussion at the table this morning, this region is being affected daily by climate change. Understatement. So every decision that you make as a business person today has to be seen through that lens. What is it about the way you're organizing, the way you're going to expand your business? Have you taken into account climate change and the impact of climate change on your business? And what are the methods we're putting in place to build resilience around climate change, whether it's insurance or whether it's how you build your business, where you build your business, and how you're securing your infrastructural assets. We know from research that the private sector in the Caribbean is very bad on research and development. A 2014 study of over 1,400 firms in the region suggests that anywhere between 15 and 30% of firms are involved in doing some kind of research. What do I mean by that? A lot of companies are still doing business as if they were operating in 1950 and 1960 and 1970. There has not been a lot of innovation in how the private sector works. Juan Carlos is looking at his watch, which suggests that I'm well over 7 minutes and cognitive depletion is starting to set in. But this number is way too low to carry your firms forward for the future. Given what's happening with technology, and you all know it because now we have watches that can tell us how fast we're running and breathing and heartbeats and so on, there are firms all over using technology to improve the way they deliver services and the way they produce their products all over the world. It's a real obstacle to competitiveness that our firms are not involved in using technology to that level. And of course, I could be making a gross misstatement because there are firms who are investing in innovation in this region, but not to the extent that we would like. There are many opportunities presenting themselves as a result of the climate change dimension, as well as the move to improve the extent to which we use renewable energy in this region. James will talk about opportunities there are in the renewable energy space. And why is that? Not only is it good for the planet, but it's also, not only is it good for the planet in terms of climate change, but it's also an important cost of doing business throughout the region. Electricity comes up as the first major cost for expanding a business as an obstacle. How much it costs, energy, and energy is related to water, which is also a scarce resource. 30% of the cost of water is related to energy as well. 40? Okay. I talked about government services to the private sector, to consumers. How do we improve the business climate? And we tend to see most of the improvements in the business climate as falling on government and regulators. But if you look at the indicators, the rankings, and I can't stress enough how we have to move away from using anecdotes to using empirical evidence to make decisions, right? So every year the World Bank does the Doing Business Indicator rankings for about 190 countries. Barbados ranks 129th in the rankings, so not good. The highest Caribbean country in the ranking is Jamaica, and Jamaica is a country I live in and do most of my work in, and 75 is not really a good ranking either. We want to be in the top 20, top 50 rankings in these Doing Business Indicators. Trinidad and Tobago is 105. Most of us, 2 decades ago, thought Trinidad and Tobago was going to be the engine of growth for the Caribbean as a country. Something's happening in Trinidad that's forcing them low on the rankings. We need to figure out what are these barriers for improving those rankings. And last but not least, because there's a lot of talk about this everywhere you turn, is what is the support mechanism in the ecosystem that supports medium and small enterprises in the region. And I want to tell you that it's not just access to finance. Finance is there, but it's not just access to finance. This region, and James will talk about this a lot, this region actually has a lot of liquidity in the financial system. But that liquidity is not finding its way into funding bankable, productive projects. So those things need to fix. I think I want to stop here because that's a lot of food for thought, and invite James to talk about IDB Invest and what we're trying to do here with you in Barbados. Thank you.